The massive crystal towers of Zephyros Prime glowed with a dim, desperate light as Elder Veltar walked quickly through the corridors toward the emergency council chamber. Long, thin arms trembled slightly as he carried the latest reports. The news was worse than ever before. The Void Swarm had struck again. 3 entire star systems had vanished in the past month, consumed by the hungry parasites that traveled between worlds like a plague of darkness. The Zephyrian people, who could speak to each other with their minds across vast distances, had been sending desperate calls for help throughout the galaxy. But no one answered, no one came. Veltar entered the circular council chamber, where the other leaders waited. The room was filled with a soft blue glow from the crystal walls, but the usual brightness seemed dimmed by fear and exhaustion. Counselor Nixara stood at the center, her usually bright skin now pale and tired. Her large eyes held the weight of terrible knowledge. "Tell me," Veltar said quietly as he took his place at the council table. Nixara touched the communication. Crystal before her, and holographic images filled the air above them. Star maps showed the advancing darkness of the Void Swarm, spreading like an infection across their region of space. "The Altarian Empire has gone completely silent," she reported in a voice that barely whispered. "Their last transmission was a scream for help, then nothing. We believe they have been consumed entirely." The other council members shifted nervously in their seats. The Altarians had been one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, with technology far beyond what most species could imagine. If they had fallen to the swarm, what hope did anyone have? "The Stellar Federation has retreated beyond the outer rim of the galaxy," Nixara continued. "They sent a message saying they would not risk their worlds for others. Even the ancient keepers have sealed their dimensional barriers and refuse all contact." Veltar felt his heart sink lower. With each piece of news, the keepers were older than memory itself, beings of incredible power who had watched over the galaxy for millions of years. If even they were hiding, the situation was truly hopeless. The Void Swarm was unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. They were not conquerors seeking territory or resources. They were parasites, pure and simple. They consumed entire civilizations, absorbing their knowledge, their technology, their very essence, and used it to become stronger. Each world they devoured made them more dangerous than before. "Every species we have contacted has either run away or been destroyed," Nixara said, her voice breaking slightly. "We are alone." The council chamber fell into heavy silence. Outside the crystal walls, they could see the lights of their beautiful city, filled with millions of Zephyrians going about their daily lives. Most of them did not yet know how close the end was coming. Veltar closed his eyes and tried to think. His people were peaceful by nature. They had developed incredible psychic abilities over thousands of years, allowing them to communicate across space and even read the thoughts of other beings. But they had never been warriors. They had never needed to be, till now. "Wait," came a soft voice from the corner of the room. Technician Quinvel sat hunched over his monitoring equipment, his many eyes focused on a display screen. "I am detecting something strange." The council members turned toward him with hope and curiosity. Any new information might be important now. "I am picking up primitive electromagnetic transmissions from Sector 7G, Quinvel said, his fingers dancing over the controls. "It is a small system with a yellow star. Signals are coming from the third planet." Nixara moved quickly to his station. "What kind of signals?" "Radio waves," Quinvel replied, looking puzzled. "Very basic technology. The species appears to call themselves humans, but the content is ... unusual." He activated the speakers, and the council chamber filled with strange sounds. Music played, then voices speaking in different languages, then what seemed to be news reports. The Zephyrians, with their psychic abilities, could understand the meaning even though the languages were alien to them. The humans were talking about wars, conflicts between their own kind, arguments over territory, resources, beliefs. Their world seemed to be in constant turmoil, with different groups fighting each other endlessly. "They are barely spacefaring," Nixara observed with disappointment in her voice. "What could such primitive beings possibly offer us? They cannot even live in peace with their own species." But Veltar listened more carefully. Beneath the chaos, in conflict, he heard something else. He heard stories of humans helping strangers in disasters. He heard songs about unity and hope. He heard reports of enemies working together when faced with greater threats. "Look deeper," he said to Quenville. "Show me their history." The technician adjusted his equipment, and more information flowed through the speakers. Stories of humans who had faced impossible odds and somehow survived, tales of small groups defeating much larger enemies through clever tactics and determination, records of a species that seemed to grow stronger when faced with the greatest challenges. Veltar studied the chaotic signals for a long time, noting patterns that the others missed. Yes, the humans fought among themselves constantly. But when they united for a common cause, they became something entirely different, something dangerous. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "in our desperation, it is time to try the impossible." The great Assembly Hall of the United Nations had never been so quiet. 200 world leaders sat in their seats, staring at the large screens that showed star maps and alien technology they could barely understand. The message had been playing for 10 minutes, but nobody moved or spoke. The voice speaking to them was not human. It came from beings called Zephyrians, who lived among the stars far from Earth. Their words were translated by computers. But the fear in their message was clear to everyone. "We are dying," the alien voice had said. "A great enemy moves through space, eating entire worlds. They have destroyed civilizations that existed for millions of years. We have asked everyone for help, but they all run away or hide. You are our last hope." Admiral Kong Minho stood up slowly from his seat. He was a tall man with graying hair, wearing the dark blue uniform of the Korean Space Command. Everyone in the room knew him as one of Earth's best military strategists. "Friends," he said in a calm voice that carried clearly through the silent hall, "the aliens have given us information about this enemy they call the Void Swarm. According to their calculations, this threat will reach our part of space in 18 months. A woman in an expensive suit from the European delegation stood up. "Quickly, surely you are not suggesting we fight these creatures. They have destroyed beings far more advanced than us. We should focus on hiding or escaping." But Admiral Kang shook his head. "We have 3 choices. We can hide and hope they do not find us. We can try to run to another part of the galaxy, or we can stand and fight." "Fight with what?" shouted someone from the back of the room. "Our best weapons are toys compared to what these aliens possess." General Park Juwon walked to the front of the room. She was younger than Admiral Kong, with short black hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. On her uniform was a new patch that most people had never seen before, the symbol of something called the Terran Defense Coalition. "The Zephyrians contacted us because they are desperate," she said, "but I think they chose us for a different reason too. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy has the same problem. They have become too comfortable, too peaceful. They have forgotten how to be hunters." President Kim Seung-won activated a holographic display that appeared above the center of the room. Images began to show pictures from human history, battles and wars, moments of triumph and defeat. "Look at our past," he said. "Humans have spent thousands of years learning to fight. We fight against wild animals, against natural disasters, against disease, and yes, against each other. We are not the most advanced species, but we might be the most experienced at war." The images continued to play. Ancient battles with swords and spears, modern conflicts with tanks and aircraft, pictures of human soldiers in harsh environments, adapting and surviving where others would die. Every generation of humans has faced something that seemed impossible to defeat, President Kim continued, "and every time, we found a way. Yes. Is what we do. This is who we are." The room began to buzz with quiet conversations as representatives talked among themselves. Some seemed scared, others excited, but something was changing in the atmosphere. Then something remarkable happened. The representative from Japan stood up and spoke directly to the Korean delegation. "Our nations have had differences in the past, but if Earth is threatened, Japan will stand with Korea." The American president rose next. "The United States offers all our military resources to this effort." One by one, leaders from around the world began to speak. Old enemies promised to work together. Rich nations offered to share their wealth. Poor countries promised their soldiers and determination. Within 3 days, something impossible had occurred. Ancient hatreds were set aside. Weapons that had been pointed at each other for decades were turned toward space. The greatest military, minds from every nation began working together, planning for a war unlike anything in human history. Scientists shared their most secret research. Engineers began designing new ships and weapons. Soldiers from different armies trained together, learning to fight as one force instead of separate nations. When the Zephyrian diplomatic ship arrived at Earth's moon 2 weeks later, Ambassador Veltar expected to find a primitive species paralyzed by fear and confusion. Instead, he found something that amazed him. 12 million humans had volunteered to leave their home world and fight in space. Factories that had made cars and computers were now building warships. The entire planet seemed to be preparing for battle with an energy and determination that the peaceful Zephyrians could barely understand. Veltar stood on the observation deck of the lunar space station, watching the first human battle fleet prepare to depart. The ships were smaller than what other galactic civilizations used, and their technology was simpler. But there was something about them that seemed dangerous and purposeful. Admiral Kong joined him at the viewing window. The human looked calm and confident, not at all like someone preparing for what might be a suicide mission. "I do not understand," Veltar said, his alien voice filled with curiosity. "Why would your people risk everything for strangers you have never met? Why would you leave your beautiful world to fight our war?" Admiral Kong was quiet for a moment, watching his ships move toward their destiny among the stars. When he finally spoke, his answer was simple, but carried the weight of human history, because no one should have to face the end alone. The underground command center shook violently as another explosion hit the surface above. Colonel Lee Hee-jin gripped the edge of the metal table, watching the glowing screens that showed the battle raging outside. Red dots representing enemy forces covered the display like a disease, far outnumbering the small blue dots that marked human and Zephyrian positions. For 3 days, the Proxima defense line had somehow held against the Void Swarm. 3 days was longer than any other force in galactic history had lasted against these creatures. But Hee-jin knew the numbers, and the numbers were terrible. For every alien monster they killed, 10 more seemed to crawl out of the massive hive ships that hung in space like dark clouds. Sergeant Choi Dae-ho ran up to her, his uniform torn and covered in strange alien blood. "Colonel," he said, breathing hard, "the Zephyrian commander is on the radio. He wants permission to retreat. He says the position is lost, and we should abandon the defense line." Hee-jin almost laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. The Zephyrians were brave, but they thought like most advanced civilizations. When faced with superior numbers and firepower, they believed the logical choice was to retreat and regroup. They did not understand that humans had spent centuries learning to win battles they should have lost. "Tell Commander Velkos that his forces should fall back to the secondary positions," she said calmly. "But make sure he understands we are not retreating, we are redeploying." The difference was important. Retreating meant running away in defeat. Redeploying meant moving your pieces on the board to set up a better attack. Hee-jin had studied every great military strategist in human history. From ancient Chinese generals to modern special forces commanders, she knew that sometimes the best way to win was to make the enemy think they were winning. She pressed the communication button that connected her to all human forces in the area. "All units, this is Colonel Lee. Initiate Protocol Taigok immediately." Across the battlefield, human soldiers began to move in ways that would have seemed crazy to any other species. Some units that had been fighting hard suddenly broke and ran, as if they were scared. Other units that had been hiding suddenly attacked with fierce determination. Groups that had been working together split apart and went in different directions, to the Zephyrians watching from their ships above. It looked like the human forces were falling apart in panic and confusion, but Hee-jin knew better. Protocol Taigok was named after an ancient Korean symbol representing the balance of opposites, order and chaos, strength and weakness, advance and retreat. The humans were not panicking, they were dancing. The Void Swarm operated like a single giant brain, controlling millions of bodies. Every creature in the swarm was connected to every other creature through some kind of psychic link. This gave them perfect coordination. They could move like a single organism, never making mistakes, never getting confused. But this strength was also a weakness. The hive mind expected enemies to behave in logical, predictable ways. When faced with organized resistance, they would adapt and overcome. But the humans were not giving them organized resistance. They were giving them chaos. Captain Name Wubin crawled through the twisted metal corridors of a crashed swarm ship, leading a team of 6 soldiers. The ship had been shot down hours ago, but it was still alive in a horrible way. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat, and strange lights flickered under the organic-looking surface. "Remember," he whispered to his squad as they moved deeper into the ship, "we are not here to destroy this thing. We are here to confuse it." Each soldier carried a backpack full of small explosive devices, but these were not ordinary bombs. Human engineers had designed them specifically to disrupt the electrical and psychic signals that the swarm used to communicate. The goal was not to cause the most damage, but to cause the most confusion. They placed the devices carefully throughout the ship, in locations that their intelligence suggested were important for communication. When they were done, Captain Nem led his team back outside and activated the detonator. The explosions were small and quiet, nothing like the massive blasts that other species used in warfare. But their effect was immediate and dramatic. The crashed ship began to twitch and writhe as different sections lost contact with each other. Parts of the ship that had been working together suddenly began fighting each other, as if they could not remember which side they were on. Above the planet, the same thing was happening to other swarm vessels. Human sabotage teams had infiltrated dozens of ships, planting confusion bombs that disrupted the hive mind's ability to think clearly. For the first time in their existence, parts of the swarm began making mistakes. Zephyrian observers in orbit watched in amazement as swarm ships collided with each other, as ground forces attacked their own supply lines, as perfectly coordinated formations dissolved into chaos. The humans had found a way to turn the swarm's greatest strength, their unity, into their greatest weakness. Colonel Li Haijin stood in her command bunker, watching the tactical display as red enemy dots began to flicker and fade. The swarm was still dangerous, still numerous, but they were no longer the perfect killing machine they had been. "Sergeant Choi," she said with the first real smile she had worn in days, "send a message to all human forces. Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2. The real battle was just beginning. The walls around Major Han Soyoung breathed like a living thing. She pressed herself against the slimy surface of the corridor, feeling the alien heartbeat that pulsed through the entire massive ship. This was no ordinary vessel. It was a creature, a living hive that housed millions of swarm entities in its belly. Soyoung had been inside this nightmare for 2 weeks now. Along with her team of special forces, soldiers, they had entered through a damaged section of the ship's hull, moving slowly and carefully to avoid detection. Every day they studied the patterns of the creatures around them, learning how the hive operated, finding its weak points. The corridors were dark and wet, with strange lights that flickered under the organic walls. Sometimes they could hear the sounds of the swarm creatures moving through other passages, clicking, buzzing, scratching sounds that made their skin crawl. But they had learned to move when the creatures were busy, to hide when they were searching, to become invisible, in plain sight. Major came a whisper through her earpiece. Private Yoon Ji-hoon was positioned at the entrance to a large chamber ahead. "The neural cluster is 2 levels down from here, but ma'am, I can see thousands of them." Soyan crawled forward too. Look through the opening. Below them was a vast space filled with swarm creatures of every size and shape. Some were as small as insects, others as large as trucks. They moved in perfect coordination like parts of a single machine. At the center of the chamber, a massive brain-like structure pulsed with electrical activity. She checked her weapon carefully. It was not one of the advanced plasma rifles that other alien species used in their wars. It was a simple human projectile weapon, but the bullets were special. Human scientists had spent months studying captured swarm tissue, learning how their cells worked, how they held together. The ammunition in her gun was designed to attack the creatures at the molecular level, causing their bodies to fall apart. From the inside, "Remember our mission?" she whispered to her team through the communicator. "We are not here to fight thousands of these things. We are here to make them fight each other." They moved carefully through the ship's passages using routes they had mapped over the past weeks. The swarm creatures were focused on the space battle happening above the planet. Their collective mind was busy coordinating the fight against the human and Zephyrian fleets, which meant they were not paying attention to the small group of infiltrators. Moving through their home, Soyang's team reached the neural cluster chamber just as the battle above reached its peak. The massive brain structure was glowing brightly, sending and receiving millions of signals every second. This was the command center of the hive. It's a place where all the creatures received their orders. She pulled a small device from her pack, a quantum resonator that human engineers had built specifically for this mission. It was designed to broadcast a signal that would mimic the swarm's own communication frequency, but with tiny differences that would cause confusion and conflict. "Private Yoon, watch the entrances," she whispered. "Private Kim, keep monitoring the swarm's communication patterns. I need to know the moment they detect us." Soyang moved toward the center of the chamber, stepping carefully between the swarm creatures that surrounded the neural cluster. They were so focused on their tasks that they did not notice her. She reached the pulsing brain structure and placed the resonator device directly against its surface. The device activated immediately, sending its confusing signals directly into the swarm's collective consciousness. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The creatures continued their work as before, but then slowly, things began to change. One group of swarm creatures suddenly stopped what they were doing and turned toward another group. The second group responded aggressively, as if they thought they were being attacked. The two groups were fighting each other with vicious intensity. The confusion spread like a virus through the neural network. Different sections of the hive began receiving conflicting orders. Some creatures were told to attack the human ships above, while others were told to defend against human ships. Some were ordered to guard the neural cluster, while others were commanded to destroy it. "It's working," whispered Private Kim, monitoring the communication channels. "The hive mind is fracturing. Different sections are fighting each other." Throughout the massive ship, chaos erupted. Swarm creatures that had worked together for centuries suddenly saw each other as enemies. The parasites that had consumed countless civilizations were experiencing something completely new: internal conflict, confusion, the breakdown of their perfect unity above the planet. Admiral Song Mingi watched her tactical display with growing excitement. The swarm fleet, which had been moving in perfect formation just minutes before, was now in complete disarray. Ships were colliding with each other, firing on their own allies, breaking formation, and flying in random directions. "All ships," she announced over the fleet communication system, "commence final assault. The hive mind is broken. We hunt the survivors." The human fleet moved forward with the precision of experienced predators. They had studied the swarm's weaknesses, learned their patterns, and now they were exploiting every advantage. Ship after ship fell to human weapons as the confused aliens struggled to coordinate their defense. For the first time in galactic history, the Void Swarm was retreating. The parasites that had devoured entire civilizations were running away, their perfect unity shattered by human cunning and determination. In the neural cluster chamber, Major Han Soyang smiled as she watched the chaos around her. The predators had finally met their match. The great meeting hall on Concordia was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Creatures with scales sat next to others with fur. Some floated in the air, while others needed special chairs to support their strange bodies. Representatives from dozens of different worlds had come together for the most important discussion in galactic history. 6 months had passed since the humans had done the impossible. They had defeated the Void Swarm. The parasites that had consumed entire civilizations for thousands of years were gone, destroyed by a species that most had considered primitive and violent. Now everyone wanted to understand what this meant. For the future, Elder Veltar stood at the center of the assembly, his long robes changing colors to show respect and gratitude. He was old even by Zephyrian standards, and his voice carried the wisdom of centuries when he spoke. "Friends from across the stars," he began, "we gather today to honor the humans who saved us all. Without their courage and skill, we would all be dead, consumed by the swarm. The Zephyrian Collective formally invites the human species to join our alliance. We offer them full membership, with all the benefits and protections that come with it. A wave of agreement rippled through the assembly. Many species nodded their heads or made sounds of approval. It seemed obvious that the humans should be rewarded for their service. Admiral Kong Minho stood up from the human section. He was wearing his best uniform, decorated with medals and honors from many different alien governments. His hair was grayer than it had been 6 months ago, and there were new lines around his eyes from the stress of war. But he stood straight and proud as he addressed the assembly. "We are honored by your offer," he said in his calm, steady voice, "but we have a different idea." The hall fell silent. Everyone leaned forward to hear what the humans would propose. Admiral Kong activated a small device, and a holographic display appeared above the center of the room, showed a new kind of organization, not the pyramid-shaped hierarchies that most galactic governments used, but something more like a circle, with every species connected to every other species. "We do not want to join existing alliances," he explained. "Instead, we propose a mutual defense compact. Each species keeps its independence, its culture, its own way of life. But when one of us calls for help, we all answer." Excited conversations broke out across the assembly. Some representatives seemed confused by the idea, while others appeared interested. The concept was strange to most of them. Galactic civilizations usually worked through strict hierarchies, with stronger species ruling over weaker ones, or through collective consciousness networks, where everyone thought the same thoughts. General Park Jawan stepped forward to explain further. She was younger than Admiral Kang, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything around her. "We have learned something important from fighting the swarm," she said. "Diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. The swarm failed because they tried to make everything the same. They absorbed other species and turned them into copies of themselves. We succeed when we work together while staying different." The debate continued for hours. Some species worried about giving up their traditional ways of organizing. Others wondered if such a loose alliance could really work. But slowly, more and more representatives began to see the wisdom in the human proposal. Then, suddenly, all discussion stopped. A priority emergency signal was broadcasting on all frequencies. Everyone in the assembly hall could hear the desperate transmission coming through their communication devices. "This is the Katorian Republic," said a frightened voice speaking in a language that the translation computers struggled to understand. "We are under attack by unknown forces. Our worlds are being destroyed. We need help immediately. Is anyone out there? Can anyone hear us?" The hall was completely silent. Everyone looked toward the human delegation, waiting to see what they would do. The humans had just finished a terrible war. Their fleets were damaged, their soldiers were tired, and they had every right to rest and recover. Admiral Kong looked at his officers. General Park nodded slightly. Other human representatives straightened in their chairs. Without speaking, they all seemed to reach the same decision. Admiral Kang activated his communicator and spoke in a clear, strong voice that everyone in the galaxy could hear. "This is Admiral Kong Minho of the Terran Defense Coalition. We hear your call for aid. Earth is mobilizing our fleets immediately. Hold your positions. Help is coming." As the human delegation prepared to leave for another battle, Elder Veltar approached Admiral Kong near the shuttle that would take them back to their ships. "I do not understand," the old Zephyrian said. "You could demand payment for your help. You could ask for territory, or technology, or resources. Instead, you just ... help. Why?" Admiral Kang paused at the entrance to his shuttle. He looked back at all the alien representatives who had gathered to watch the humans depart. Some looked grateful, others looked amazed, and a few looked worried about what kind of species they were dealing with. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "And because the strongest warriors are not those who conquer others. The strongest warriors are those who protect others." The shuttle lifted off, carrying the humans back to their fleet and another impossible mission. Across the galaxy, Other species were finally beginning to understand that, when darkness came and hope seemed lost, there was one world that would always answer the call. Earth had become the galaxy's guardian through the simple act of caring about strangers.